Okay. So there's two types of conditioning. What are they? I don't allow you to look at your notes.
Operant class. No.
Don't second guess yourself. You're right. So we got classical conditioning. And what was the other one?
Operant.
Right. Operant conditioning. And can you tell me a little bit about classical first?
That one is like when you do something and like something else happens. So one thing leads to another. The
Right.
definition she had was really confusing.
Okay. So classical conditioning is basically pairing a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to produce a conditioned response. And do you understand what those terms mean, a conditioned
No,
stimulus? I don't know, you look at your notes. Can you tell me it without looking?
I know like there's I know the 4 different ones, but I don't know what they are.
Okay.
It's basically like,
So what are the four?
so there's unconditioned stimulus and response.
Okay, so I'm going to call this US and an unconditioned response. Okay.
And then conditioned, so CS and CF. So conditioned response and conditioned stimulus.
Okay. So, classical conditioning is, just write this, pairing I should call it CS. A conditioned stimulus with a conditioned response, or with a, sorry, a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to produce a conditioned response. And this definition will make more sense once we define these four things. So what's an unconditioned stimulus?
That one is crap. It's too early for this. That's I don't remember. We did this. We did examples.
So can you give me an example? Maybe that will help. No?
No.
Okay.
I'm never doing that in college again.
Okay, so unconditioned stimulus is a naturally occurring and I know this isn't very professional, but I'm just going to put a naturally occurring thing. That will produce an unconditioned response. And so an example of this would be like if somebody is, I don't know. So like in Pavlov's dogs. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the unconditioned stimulus was for Pavlov's dogs?
The unconditioned stimulus would be something. Would that be the food?
Excuse me, right, yes, so it is the food. So in Pavlov's dogs, the unconditioned stimulus is the food, which produces our unconditioned response. And what's an unconditioned response?
That is like the reaction that you get.
Right, naturally occurring reaction to the unconditioned stimulus. To the unconditioned stimulus. And so what would be the example from Pavlov's dogs for the unconditioned response?
So it'd be like the reaction that they got when
The
they
food was
viewed
presented to them.
Yeah. So what the dog did when they gave him the food.
Right, and what did the dogs do?
What did they do?
It's the same thing that happens when like your mom cooks your favorite meal.
You get happy?
You do get happy, but you start to salivate, right? Like, not even on purpose, like your mouth just kind of starts to salivate a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because you can smell it. And so it's the same thing for the dog. When they see the food or when they smell the food, they start to salivate because they know that they're about to eat.
Mhm.
And the body does this because saliva helps break down the food. It makes it easier for you to chew and all that stuff. And then, so a conditioned stimulus, what's a conditioned stimulus?
It would just be opposite and unconditioned.
Not opposite. I'll just write it.
Unnatural?
Not unnatural, because it's not unnatural. It doesn't have to be unnatural. But what this is a stimulus paired with an unconditioned stimulus to produce a conditioned response. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And so in Pavlov's dogs, what would be our conditioned stimulus?
So those food. So it would be like, I'm trying to think of this one. We did the.
What was the other stimulus that was presented to the dogs?
I don't remember.
Remember the bell?
I'm not sure if we did this. Now that I think of it, I don't remember going over the dogs. I just briefly remember reading it.
Okay. So, yeah, because this isn't, like, because yours says 8 to 10.
Yeah, that's why. Because I know she said that this would be on there.
About the classical conditioning?
Yeah, the conditioning would be on there.
Well, then we'll just go over it anyways.
Yeah, I just don't remember learning with the dogs.
Okay,
Maybe
so.
it's just my brain, but.
Okay, so what happened was Pavlov paired the tone of a bell with the food, so he would present them both at the same time. And so the dogs would salivate when they saw the food, but they would also hear the bell.
Mhm.
And so then they would start to salivate when they heard the bell as well.
Okay.
Like he was trying to give them the tone of the bell to produce the salivation, even though it was actually the food
I
causing
feel like
it.
we did this with ducks.
With ducks?
Yeah, I think we watched a duck video on this. Or
Okay.
goose
Yeah,
or
I'm not
something.
sure. I haven't seen the duck video.
So-
But does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and then the conditioned response.
So it'd be,
Huh?
I'm just thinking about talking this up.
Okay. Is the reaction to the conditioned stimulus. Okay. So, what happened with Pavlov's dogs is first, the dogs saw the food and they started to salivate. Salivation was the unconditioned response, the food was the unconditioned stimulus. What then happened is Pavlov would ring a bell at the same time the food was presented, and so the dogs would start to salivate because they saw the food, so it was paired with the unconditioned stimulus. But then, and then the dogs would start to salivate, which if they're seeing the food, then it's still an unconditioned response, right?
Mm.
Because they're still salivating because they see the food. But once Pavlov had done this enough times, what he would do is he would not even present the food to the dogs. and he would just ring the tone of the bell, which is our conditioned stimulus. And then they would start to salivate, just because what they thought when they heard the bell, they would get the food as well. And so now it's a conditioned response, the salivation is, because it's produced by the conditioned stimulus. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So that's classical conditioning in a nutshell. Operant conditioning. Do you remember talking about operant conditioning?
Always. Yeah. That was.
It is right here.
Here. I don't know if that's classical conditioning.
Yeah, that's just classical
Classical.
conditioning.
Oh, look, I took notes and missed that. Yeah, this is larger motion.
Okay, so you missed the operant.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Okay. So, operant conditioning. Please don't touch the walls. Operant conditioning is basically just rewarding or punishing something in order to produce the desired behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we talk about rewarding and punishing, we get into this thing called reinforcers and punishers. And so what do you think a reinforcer is?
So reinforcer, that would cause the people, that would, if you reinforce something like, it causes somebody to want to, like, do that more, like, so if, like, you're reinforcing a good behavior, it'll cause them to continue to want to do that good behavior.
Right, so a reinforcer is going to increase the behavior. So